I was looking recently at how many oil paint colors are out there across the different brands, and I found estimates ranging from 500 to 1500. So we'll say around 1,000. There are a ton of them. And it can be kind of overwhelming if you're out on a website and you're looking at the different brands and the different colors. And when I was getting back into painting, I remember doing a lot of research about what colors should I get? What do I absolutely need? Obviously, it depends on your style and the subjects you're going to be painting, but there was a lot of advice, a lot of perspectives, certain colors that showed up over and over. So in this video, I want to step through the paint colors that I've gotten, the ones that I've tried, and I'm going to go through them by color category. So I'll do whites, then yellows and blues and so on. And I'm going to look at it from a perspective of these are the colors that I think are a must-have for any painter, regardless of what you're doing. These are colors that would be nice to have. And then these are colors that I got, but I might skip. If I run out, I probably won't order it again. This is just my subjective opinion. I might look at two different colors and say, as far as I can tell, there's not much of a difference. You might disagree and feel like there's a massive difference between these colors. I'm looking at it through the lens of a beginner or an intermediate artist who might not be quite as discerning. And then, as I mentioned, if there are over 1,000 different colors, I haven't tried everything, but hopefully I'll have a good variety within those color categories of what I have looked at. So with that said, let's start off with the whites. The obvious one is titanium white. I think you're going to find that on any list, and it's certainly a must-have. You're going to hear people say get a larger quantity of it, and that makes sense. It's something that you'll go through quickly. And in addition to the titanium white, you also have the lead and the Kremnitz whites. Those are ones that I've tried. I can appreciate that some people don't want to go down that path because of the hazardous materials, but if you're careful and you don't mind, then I would recommend them. They behave very differently in terms of tinting strength and the consistency and the handling and the opacity and the color temperature. I think lead and Kremnitz whites are great for portraits, and when you mix them with another hue, they're not as overpowering, they're not as chalky. So for me, a lead white or a Kremnitz white is a must-have, but again, I appreciate that some people don't want to use those particular paints. Next, when I think about the greens, this one was a little bit challenging, and I tried to look across everything that I've tried. Where my mind went was thinking about them in terms of chroma, because typically within these color groups, I want something that's potent and high chroma that I can use a little bit and mix it with another color, and it's really going to make it pop. And then I like having something within a color category that's lower chroma, that's a little bit more muted, that's not going to command as much attention on the canvas. So for the greens, the ones that jumped out as potential must-haves, a good Viridian, a phthalo green yellow shade potentially. The Viridian's going to lean a little bit blue, so it might be nice to complement with something that's a little closer to the yellow side. And then for a low chroma, I like chromium oxide green. And if you want to throw in a bonus must-have green, then I have a cinnabar green light and a cadmium green, and those are both lighter and lean yellow. I really enjoy both of those straight out of the tube, so I would throw in one of those personally as a must-have. As far as the other colors that I've tried, I've done green earth, sap, olive, and Mars olive. I would put green earth in nice to have because I use it as an underpainting color. There may be others in that group that I could use, but that's just what I found in my research. So I would get more green earth if I ran out. Those other ones I would probably put it in the skip. I don't know that they offer anything that chromium oxide and green earth wouldn't cover. Then I've tried a Scheveningen green from Old Holland. My understanding is that's very comparable to a phthalo, so that feels a little bit redundant. You could probably pick one or the other. And then I have an emerald green, which is higher chroma, and my understanding is it's kind of right in the middle of the green spectrum, so that's a nice to have as well if you want something that doesn't lean blue or yellow, that's really kind of right in the middle. And then lastly, I've tried a permanent green light, which leans a little bit yellow. It's high chroma. I would probably skip that personally because I feel like some of those other ones I mentioned have it covered. Then when it comes to the reds, I did the same thing where I looked across them and thought in terms of chroma and tinting strength and color temperature, and if it leans violet or orange. And where I landed for the reds is I would definitely consider an alizarin crimson a must-have, probably a cad red light, and then a quinacridone rose or a magenta. Similar to the lead and the Kremnitz white, if you don't want to go down the cadmium path because of the hazardous materials, then I think a pyro red would be a good option. Some other reds that I've tried, Scarlet Lake, I would probably skip it just because I like the cadmiums and the pyro red. I have a naphthol red, which is very high chroma. I got that recently. I haven't tried it much at this point. I guess I would put it as a skip, but it might move up once I use it a little bit more. Then I have a Persian rose, which is kind of a deep, intense pink, and I have used that a little bit for portraits. I would put that in a nice to have, and that's similar to a quinacridone rose, which I would also consider a nice to have. You probably wouldn't need both, one or the other would be fine. And then I have a medium pink from Old Holland, and my understanding is that used to be flesh tone, or flesh was in the name or something like that, and I do think that one's useful for portraits. I find myself reaching for it periodically. I would put that in the nice to have. Then I mentioned magenta, or having kind of a violet red. I do think that's beneficial. I remember when I was initially trying to mix purples with blue and red, they just looked kind of muddy and muted. I couldn't figure out how to get a good vibrant purple. And so then I saw people talk about mixing magenta with a cobalt teal, and that helped a lot. And that's where I think that having a magenta or something that's kind of violet red is helpful. And then finally, within the reds, for low chroma colors, the ones I've tried are Venetian red, Terra Rosa, and Patchouli red. The Venetian red has some pink undertones. The Terra Rosa is kind of a brownish red, and then the Patchouli is kind of an orange red earth tone. And I don't know that you'd necessarily need all of those. I would probably pick one of those and throw it in the nice to have category. Next, for the yellows, the ones that jump out are yellow ochre and then a cadmium yellow. Same as the lead white, Kremnitz white, and the cad red. If you don't want the cadmium path, then you could do a Hansa yellow or a yellow lake or something different. But for me, I love the yellow ochre because it's a little bit more low chroma. I use it all the time for portraits and in other situations. I think you're going to commonly find that on lists of what you should include on your palette. And then for the cadmium yellows, you have a lot of different options. You have lemon and light and regular and deep. I don't know that you necessarily need all of those, but I think picking one good cadmium yellow is a great path because it's high chroma, it's potent, and it lasts a long time. You don't need a lot in your mixes. The Hansa yellow that I mentioned I think is a good option. My understanding is it's more transparent, so if you're into glazing, it could be a good one to grab, and it mixes really nice greens. Another yellow that I tried is nickel yellow. That one's mid chroma. It's a little bit weaker of a tinter, and I would consider that one a nice to have. I really have enjoyed using the nickel yellow. And then finally, I have a quinacridone gold. And I remember when I got it, there were a lot of people that really appreciated it. And I think it's good for mixing and for glazing. I haven't done much glazing, and I guess I just haven't used it a lot for mixing. I'm sure that one has a lot of potential, but for now, I would put that in the skip it category just because some of those other yellows that I mentioned should have you pretty well covered. When it comes to the blues, I think the most common one that you're going to hear about or see on lists is ultramarine blue. I would agree with that. I think that's a must-have. Anytime that I'm getting low, I'm going to order more of that. The other ones that jump out are phthalo blue, which leans a little bit cooler than ultramarine, and then cobalt blue. My understanding is cobalt's kind of a true blue. It's right in the middle. It's not leaning towards green or violet. I've tried a cerulean blue and it's a great color. The texture is just a little bit different from what I'm used to. It's a little bit thicker. So I don't use that one quite as much. I would put that in the skip it, but I can appreciate that some people love a good cerulean blue. Then I've tried a blue gray. That one I would skip. That's just a convenience blend mixture that I think I could easily get to with other colors. Then I have a video blue and a Severus blue, which my understanding is those are kind of lighter convenience phthalo blues. And I would put having one of those in a nice to have category just because they look great right out of the tube. They're just bold, vibrant colors, and I enjoy using them. Then the next two that are somewhat similar are Prussian blue and indigo. Both are very dark blues. Prussian is higher chroma and then indigo is lower chroma, but they can be really good for shadows. So for me, having a Prussian blue or an indigo is in the nice to have category. Might be able to get by without both. And finally, I have blue ochre, which I like. It's low chroma. I like to use it for different backgrounds, and I would put that firmly in the nice to have category. And then I wasn't quite sure where to put these, but I think I'll throw them in blue, cobalt teal, and cobalt turquoise. My understanding is the teal leans more green and the turquoise leans more blue, but I do think getting a cobalt teal is a must, at least for me personally. You can probably get by without it, but again, I like being able to mix the vivid purples. The next category is orange and purples. As I just mentioned, you can get there easily by mixing, but sometimes it is convenient to have those colors just to save a little bit of time. So when it comes to oranges, I've really only tried three. I've tried cadmium orange, permanent orange, and then a Montserrat orange, which is more of an apricot color. But the one I really, really like is the cadmium orange. That might be my favorite color out of all of them because I can put a little dab on the palette and it goes such a long way. I've used hardly any of it and I've used it on quite a few paintings. So I would definitely recommend the cadmium. Unless you want to stay away from that path, then maybe you could do a permanent orange or something else. For the purples, I've tried Cobalt Violet Deep, Dioxazine Purple, and Ruby Violet. The difference between the Cobalt Violet and the Dioxazine Purple is primarily in the tinting strength, at least from my experience. The Cobalt is much lower tinting strength, and the Dioxazine is very powerful. The Ruby Violet is a quinacridone violet. And so out of those three, my must-have, at least for right now, would probably be the Dioxazine Purple because of its strong tinting strength. I don't need to use very much of it, and the tube's going to last a long time. But if you're into floral art or other things, then something like the Ruby Violet might be good. For me, it would probably be a skip just because I haven't used it very much at this point. A lot of people do rave about that color, so maybe that'll climb the ladder at some point down the road. And then the final category is the earth colors, and I'm going to throw black in there and anything that's kind of a miscellaneous color. For the blacks, the most common is ivory black, and then I've tried Mars black and lamp black. I would say that most people agree that ivory black is a good all-purpose black and the one that most people get. I would agree with that. It's a must-have. Of course, there are people whose perspective is you shouldn't really use black on your palette. You should get there by mixing with burnt umber and an ultramarine blue or something like that. Personally, I like to have a black on the palette, and I do use it periodically, but that's your call to make. The Mars black is a stronger tinter than ivory, and then the lamp black has some bluish undertones. So there are situations where you might appreciate those other ones, but I would put ivory as must-have and the others as nice to have or skip it. For some of the earth tones, the ones I've tried are burnt umber, raw umber, burnt sienna, and raw sienna. My understanding is they're all kind of in the brown family. The one that I personally reach for the most is burnt umber, and maybe that's just because early on I got in the habit of grabbing that first. I think you could go out to forums and find different people who swear by some of those other ones and say that they're always going to have burnt sienna on their palette. That's purely personal preference. For me, I really like the burnt umber. I've gotten it again when I run out, and maybe I'll start to use the others, but they are very common, and so I would put all of them in at least a nice to have, with one or two of them, depending on personal preference, in the must have category. And then the last ones that I'll cover are kind of miscellaneous. These are from Vasari, and they're shale, shiprock, and adobe. I would consider them convenience blends. They're great mixers. The one I appreciate the most is shale, which is kind of a maroon, but it's really nice to darken up colors while retaining the original hue. So I use it quite a bit for shadows and different things like that, but they're all unique colors and enjoyable to work with, so at least nice to have for the three of those, but I can appreciate that some people might want to skip them too. And then I almost forgot, I do have a transparent red oxide and a transparent brown oxide, which I think are good for underpainting, and if you're into glazing, they'd be great for that. I would put those in a nice to have depending on your needs. Okay, we made it. Got through all of those, and you probably picked up that a lot of it comes down to personal preference and what you're doing, and considering things like the tinting strength and the opacity and where it sits in terms of chroma. But hopefully that gave you some ideas if you're out there looking at different paint colors or just getting started out on what you might want initially on your palette, and you can go from there. Ultimately, browsing for different colors and selecting them and receiving them and trying them is an extremely fun process, so I would recommend playing around and enjoying it. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it, and more to come soon.